So does it have a check valve in it, Sam, or?
Yes, it does have a check valve in
Okay.
it, because see, if you just release the hose, it'll stay up until you hit the release air button. Pretty cool. You know what I like? The color.
Welcome
Royal.
to Sam's Garage, presented by NH Oil Undercoating. On this episode of Sam's Garage, Lokar Performance is in the house with their locking dipstick solutions. Sam and Doug replaced the tired old front suspension on the Saleen Mustang. Sam and Phil complete the rear end suspension upgrades on Phil's Cutlass 442 convertible. And then Sam beefs up the front suspension on a Ford F150 pickup truck. Travis and Jeffrey from Lokar Performance are on site to talk about their engine and transmission locking dipsticks. The new locking dipsticks will ensure the fluids stay where they belong when out on the drag strip. And they take this opportunity to service the transmission on their competition dragster.
So today the guys and I are going to be installing something you probably don't think we need, especially in racing. You will need these. This is a locking dipstick and a locking transmission dipstick. Back in 2005, I made a B16 1.6 liter Honda Civic with a turbo, 28 pounds of boost on the dyno. The oil dipstick shot out of the crankcase, hit the wall, and oil went everywhere. That's pressure. You want to keep the dipstick in because of the pressure. And the second reason is you have a rollover. The fluids will stay in the components because the locking dipstick is not going to fall out, right?
Yeah, and we've got a true locking dipstick that actually attaches to the pan, not just locking at the handle.
That wouldn't have happened with our dipsticks.
Yeah, not at all, because you got a dual redundancy. Yes. Not only is the base locked into the transmission's casing, but the dipstick is locked into its base. Yeah. So it's not going anywhere, and the same thing with the oil dipstick. And in that way, the catch can work properly and do its job, which is to evacuate the pressure, catch the oil, and not let anything shoot out of anywhere.
Yeah, there's still just a little bit of fluid left in the pan. You have your fluid transfer?
Sure.
Awesome.
Right there.
This is really handy, Sam.
We're going to evacuate the transmission fluid because when you pull the dipstick out, the level's going to be above the base of the transmission where the top of the pan is, and you don't want to make a big giant mess. Now this is the perfect opportunity for someone to do a little bit of maintenance on their vehicle as well. Go ahead and check your magnet, clean out your magnet, change your gasket, put new fluid in it. That way you're good to go for another race day.
And the filter.
And the filter. That's a good one, Travis. Very good job. I know how the one for the transmission works. We're going to sandwich the case from the bottom of the pan and screw it in place, right? But what about the one on the engine? How's that going to work?
Depending on whether you've got a thread into the block or thread into pan, you'll thread in that. There are some that are push into pan, push into the block. For the seal, for the bottom of the transmission, you're going to want to lube that up, make sure that's going to be able to slide right in there. And you'll want to put this in first, and it'll be much easier to put the dipstick in after.
So on the locking dipsticks, we've got a threaded bottom fitting that the nut actually goes on. We give you this supplied hex tool that actually fits inside. And while you're installing it, since the bottom is threaded, it's easier to install if you just thread it in the grommet instead of actually trying to push it in. Makes it a lot easier.
Here you go, Travis. I got the gasket.
Oh,
I went out to the race trailer and found one in one of the cabinet drawers. Good job, Skip.
Oh, yes, 100%. He always tries to get everything that he needs for a race in the trailer. You never know when you might need something that breaks or something. You can't really find this stuff at a parts store anymore. If it had been 20 years ago, everybody would have a Power Glide.
All right, so I was noticing the dipstick has a set screw on top, and Travis was telling me that that is so that you can replace the different cables.
In this case, we've got a 1/4 inch MPT and aftermarket pan. We're going to gauge to fit this. We'll just back this set screw out, and we'll take this and we'll cut this to length after we filled the pan up to what the specification is. Don't fire the motor yet though, that'll suck that all up.
So all we gotta do now, we got the dipstick installed for the engine crankcase, we got the dipstick installed for the transmission. You heard him talk about the gauging of the oil level on the engine. Now don't forget that when you guys are filling up your transmission, when you do a pan drop, depending on the pan, you wanna start with 3 to 5 quarts of oil. Then you wanna crank the vehicle and check it while it's running so that you can top it off correctly. Pretty easy install for 2 awesome components. They look good, they work good, and they're gonna give us added safety both for the track and the driver.
We've now got it ready for 450 to go run the Verge Quick Outlaw Series, first weekend of April at Union, South Carolina. So.
I can't wait to come to one of those Verge Motorsports events. It's gonna bring back memories and we're gonna have a lot of fun. And me and Travis will be part of your pit crew.
Yeah, man, it'd be good to see you back on the races.
Welcome back to Sam's Garage, presented by NH Oil Undercoating. Sam and Doug move on to the next phase of the Saleen Mustang restoration project. This episode, they'll be replacing the worn out front shocks and sway bar bushings. Even with low miles on this Mustang, the age of these parts requires them to be replaced.
Doug and I are continuing the maintenance on our Saleen Mustang, and we're gonna be doing the front suspension today. The shocks are completely blown, the sway bar end links, one's missing, the others are shot, and the steering rack bushing's broken.
Yeah, and Sam, you gotta remember, this is not just a Saleen Mustang, but a Saleen Cobra, one of 136, and it's #1.
That is
the
so
first
cool.
one ever built.
Twin cam.
Twin cam, yeah, when I first got the Saleen and I took it for a drive, I could feel the front end was bouncing. I knew the front shocks were bad, the sway bar, I knew the bushings weren't quite right. We got our work cut out to put this thing back in pristine condition the way it rolled off the showroom floor.
Even though it's a shock no coilover on it, it's a strut because it's part of the construction of the front suspension. It actually works as the upper arm. So this is why it's called a strut, even though there is not a spring over it. Now this strut is holding that spring in place along with the sway bar. So when you guys take apart the front end, you have to be careful not to put too much tension on the sway bar or not to remove those 2 bolts because that spring could come knocking out of the perch. So we can put a jack up under it, or we can leave the sway bar attached, change out the strut, then go back and change out the sway bar bushings. Because this is old and rusty, the nut's not coming off, it's just spinning the shaft. So we're doing counterclockwise on the shaft itself, and he's holding the nut that way, it's gonna loosen that way. And then we have a jack on the lower control arm to take the tension off the strut and the sway bar. So the coil spring's not gonna give us any surprises.
Yeah, and so actually if you guys don't put the jack on and you were to do this, first it would be extremely hard to do it, and then once it let go, it really lets go. Because you've got all that pressure from the spring onto it, so you've got all that energy loaded up, and then when it does, it pops really hard, and you can get injured that way. So always make sure you put a jack underneath it. I just take Sam's directions, but you know what? I don't think he knows what he's doing.
Most shocks have a way for you to be able to spin the shaft because sometimes a nut will get stuck on the shaft. In our case, we have a flathead top, so we can use a flathead screwdriver. In most cases, you're gonna have an Allen head top. So we got one steering rack bushing that's bad, and when I loosen the hardware, the whole rack moves. So all 4 really need to be replaced. Now don't forget this is 27 years old. It's a good idea to go through the whole car, do all the bushings that you see are bad, like the sway bar end link and the rack. That's gonna give us a lot better steering feel.
Yeah, you know, make the car do what it was supposed to do when it was originally made. You know, it's just time, guys. When these things sit outside, you know, ozone affects them, a lot of things attack the rubber, it just starts to deteriorate. It's always good to replace it.
Installing new sway bar end link bushings. One's completely missing right here, and the rest of them are just old and dry rotted. When you do this, you want to do it in pairs. Take both sides apart, that way you got the ability to move the sway bar up and down. We're not going to replace the urethane bushings on the bar itself because they're okay. That wasn't too bad, was it?
No, it was actually really easy, a lot easier than I remember doing them.
It's amazing what a difference the front shocks are from a Saleen, from a OEM to a Saleen.
Saleen was a road racer, so all of these things were really built to run well on the road. So all those changes, the difference in the springs, the shocks, the bars, all of the changes they made in the car, that's what made these cars. handle and as much fun to drive as they were.
Well, you're going to be able to drive it, and you're going to love the new feel. The steering's going to be tight, the sway bar is going to work good, and it's no longer going to bounce.
Ah, that'd be great. You know, there's nothing worse than hitting a bump going, no.
Next week, we're going to tackle the rear suspension, so join us next week. So today we're going to talk about lifting your vehicle, whether it's a regular jack, a very cool air jack, or a lift at home if you're lucky enough to have one. I'm sure you've seen, you drive down the road and you see a car with an arch in the middle of the rocker at the very bottom. That's because someone took a jack like this and jacked it up, causing a crease, but then lifted the car. When you want to jack up your car, you want to go to the ends of the rocker panel closest to the wheel so that you don't have that issue. On Hondas, there's actually a little rectangular pad on the pinch weld that's going to be right there for you to put the jack on. On most cars also in the rear, you may have tow hooks. You can put the air jack right in the middle of the tow hook, lift up the whole rear end at the same time. You never want to damage your investment. If you guys are using a lift at home, if it's a heavy vehicle especially, you want to rest the vehicle on the locks while working on the vehicle, because then the weight of the vehicle is not on the cylinders, making that seal prematurely fail. And if you do have a lift at home, one day I was looking at the bottom of my lift and I noticed an air gap.
Sam gets ready to tackle the rear end upgrades they've got planned for Phil's convertible Cutlass 442 project. The guys will be installing a new rear disc conversion kit, as well as coilover shocks and new sway bars. The new rear end will be more than capable to handle the power from the LT1 engine.
All right, welcome back to Phil's Garage. I got Phil Pataki here from Car Capsule. We're working on his Oldsmobile, doing a full project on it. Last week we got the front brakes done and the suspension from Summit Racing QA1. We decided to put all new linkage in as well. This week what Phil and I are going to do is we're going to tackle the rear end. We're going to upgrade the suspension with upper and lower control arms and a QA1 coilover system. And we're going to convert the drum brakes to disc, also adding a new brake booster, proportioning valve, and master to complement the rear disc brakes.
And then everything's like new.
Everything will be like new.
Better than new.
Better than new.
All right, we're going to get the rest of this bracket put together.
Now that bracket is what's going to hold the new shock in place, because that's going to be the adjustable coilover that we're installing that you'll be putting together right here from QA1.
And this is on the lower.
That is on the lower,
The lower
yes.
mode, okay.
And these are the bearings that's going to allow for you guys to be able to adjust your sleeve up and down with the load of the car on there. So with this bracket, this is the original shock bolt hole. This is an extra one you're going to drill, and that's an extra one you're going to drill. That's going to give you a lot more stability. These holes are to give you guys right height adjustability in addition to the right height adjustability that's right here on the sleeve. You ready to install this?
We're ready. Let's do it.
What you guys want to do is always use anti-seize, especially on a northern car. Phil and I are going to tighten this 19mm back bracket stationary on the rear end, and we can tap and drill the two holes that's going to sandwich it to the rear end, and then we'll go ahead with our shock installation. Because we're running a big brake kit, the rotor, on some models, you'll have to shave it, the diameter of the hub. I went to Dwayne and the boys at Driveline Service of Atlanta, and they took care of that for us. So now, anytime you get a rotor, it just slides on, no matter where you are in the country. Whenever you're doing a job like this bracket's gonna go and live right here. Well, you don't want run out on your brakes, so you wanna make sure to clean this surface here. In your case, I even had to take a brush. This bolt is a 3/8 9/16 bolt, right? So you're gonna use a 3/8 drill and you knock out the rust. This is gonna take the place of the backing plate that was there before, that guy. It's the same thickness as this, that way it keeps everything in line. Just like any big brake upgrade, you have shims that you can stack to move this bracket away from the rotor if need be, depending on your axle dimensions. In our case, we're gonna use just the one bracket, and we won't need the others, so I can use the factory bolts. Phil and I got a lot done on the back of his Oldsmobile. First off, we did a rear disc brake conversion by Summit Racing. We've got QA1 lower control arms boxed in, nice and strong, along with their very nice coilover setup, and Summit Racing upper control arms. This rear end with that Summit Racing sway bar should handle all the power that LT1's going to put down. What do you think?
I think we're getting really close. Took a little extra time with the rotors, shaving down the axles, but we're getting this close to being showcase worthy.
Only this close?
Well, close.
We haven't cranked it yet, so let's see. That's what we're going to do next week. We're going to tackle the Ep5. We got a PSI conversion kit. We're going to install it, and hopefully we'll crank it up.
Welcome back to Sam's Garage, presented by NHOU. Sam has a customer's Ford F150 in the garage to get all new front suspension parts. The truck has over 100,000 miles and is in need of a refresh. Luckily, Mevotech has the answer with their front suspension kit, so this pickup will ride better than it did the day it rolled off the assembly line.
Man, 150,000 miles. That bolster on the seat needs some work too. But today we're going to be concentrating on the front end. This is Buddy's truck from State Collision Center, Ford F150 four-wheel drive. It's got front independent double wishbone suspension, and it needs a new complete overhaul. We've got bearings, we've got upper control arms, lower control arms, sway bar end links, and tie rods. This is going to run like new when we're done. Today we're going to be replacing all the front end suspension on this Ford truck. The upper control arm, bearing, the sway bar end link, tie rod end, and the lower control arm, all with Mevotech parts. Procedure I'm going to do is, this thing's got a spacer in the front, a leveling kit. I'm going to remove the upper arm, disconnect my ABS line, pull this back, pull off my brake caliper and my rotor, making this a lot lighter, disconnect my tie rod, disconnect my sway bar, remove the knuckle. Then I'm going to tackle the shock because the bolts go in towards the shock, so the shock's got to come out. Then I'm going to remove the lower arm and the upper arm and go all back with new parts. What keeps me coming back to Mevotech is their quality. With the greasable patented control bearing, allows you to grease those bearings or the joints, keep them tight and keep them lasting that much longer. The Repeltec anti-corrosion, like you saw me show you on the bearing, keeps that bearing rust-free and looking good forever. The patented locking dust boot, that is awesome. Sometimes those dust boots is the reason why there is premature failure on the joint. You don't want that. And that cotter pin is awesome because you don't need any tools and you can put them on and on with just your fingers. Their attention to detail shows in their packaging. They secure all their products so that nothing gets damaged when they're on their way to you. That's why I love to always come back to Mevotech. Julie and I have everything stripped down. That's really the easiest way to do it. We're going to go back with all the new Mevotech parts in reverse procedure as we took it down. One thing you have to make sure is these are rubber bushings, not urethane. So in the same manner, if you guys remember when I took it out, it rested right there. Okay? The reason why it rests right there is because at ride height, that's where it lives, so it goes up and down in its normal travel. If you tighten it here, or if you tighten it there, you're going to bind the rubber. It's going to fight against itself, it's going to break prematurely, and it's going to keep the truck from being level on the front end. Main thing is these bolts go in from the inside, so the strut lives there, and the strut has to go in after the upper control arm goes in. Suspensions have come sealed, meaning there are no grease fittings, except for maybe on some tie rods on some certain trucks. Everything on this was sealed. With Mevotech, they give you grease fittings and cotter pins. There were no cotter pins on this to begin with. So that's a nice little peace of mind safety and knowing that you can grease up your joints and get a lot more longer life out of them. Grease fittings on the sway bar end links as well. The cool thing about the end links is they are a solid piece of metal with two joints on each side versus the multi-links, bushings, washers that we're all used to. That makes for a lot stiffer sway bar end link, and it's going to allow the sway bar to work that much better. You guys loosen the jam nut to put the outer tie rod in. Don't forget to tighten it. Two reasons. One, it'll back off and could mess up toe. And the second reason is the guy at the alignment shop's going to make fun of you. You don't want that. I know Buddy's going to love his truck. That was a lot of work, but well worth it. Really, it takes about 3 to 4 hours, 2 hours inside. Anytime you guys are working on your car or truck, always take a look at the maintenance. This is the perfect time to look and see if you need brake pads, if there are any leaks. I got an axle shaft leaking on the left side. I got the oil pan gasket leaking. Buddy doesn't even know this. So he's going to find out, he's going to get them fixed, and it'll keep on trucking.
Be sure to check out Sam's Garage on these other media platforms. Send us questions and feedback to info@samsgaragetv.com. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Sam's Garage. Lokar gave us some tips on how to keep your vehicle's fluids where they belong. Sam and Doug replaced the worn-out shocks and bushings on the Saleen Mustang. Phil gave Sam a helping hand while upgrading the rear suspension of his Cutlass. And then Sam replaced the front suspension parts with a new kit from Mevotech on an F150.